So, in this session, we're going to focus on internet use in Switzerland and, of course, more specifically on social media use and social networking site use as a context for this entire course and this entire topic. Basically, we're going to go through a number of figures and charts on internet use in Switzerland. We're talking about basically everyday use, kind of, I don't know, like you could call it regular people or just individuals as they use these devices, mostly in a private life context. Um, Now, the numbers we're going to be looking at are from the World Internet Project Switzerland, um, which is part of a larger project, the World Internet Project, with 20, 30 countries worldwide, and the University of Zurich, or the Department of Communication and Media Research, and even more specifically, the Media Change and Innovation Division, of which I'm also a member, is the Swiss partner, the country partner. So what this means practically is that every 2 years, in collaboration with a social research institute, we conduct about 1,200 telephone interviews, with pretty high quality sampling in terms of representativity. So we have a good picture of the Swiss population. It's done in three languages, in all three regions, for people aged 14 and up. And one of the reasons we're doing this by phone still is so that we know in the first place how many people are actually non-users of the internet, and that's about 10% currently. So about 10% of the people we reach report that they don't themselves use the internet. Um, so that's a bit of the context. The most recent figures are from the year 2019. And as you can see, I'm on the page of the project here with the latest results. We do have a summary report that you're welcome to look at, and it is English. It's the only one that's in English language. We'll be going through some of the German reports here just because they offer much more detail. But you'll get the gist of it in the English language report also. And now here I'll attempt, of course, to translate the relevant stuff as we go along. So as a first picture, let's just look at the report on the diffusion of the internet in Switzerland. And if we go to one of the first graphs, um, just a second, right here. So this is just a very general overview. As I mentioned, we have about 10% who don't use the internet. And in this figure, you can already see users of social networking sites works out something above 60%. So social networking sites is already obviously kind of a subcategory of social media, but it's what most people would think about, right? When you mention social media, and we will have talked about this in the more theoretical and definition session. Um, if you mention social media, I guess the average person will associate this with Facebook, more or less. Of course, there are several other applications that no longer exist, newer things, and some where it's not clear if we should call them social media. And as we will have talked about, or will talk about, you can make the case that any media is social. Because if you don't have, in the sense of communication media between people, because if you don't have that element, that we're talking about different media, maybe some kind of, I don't know, some kind of atoms in the blood that communicate something to your organs. Sure, that could be a medium, but that's obviously not what we're talking about. So this is the general overview. If we look at the second figure, this introduces the time trends. So we have been doing this for a number of years now, as I said, every 2 years, starting in 2011. Some of the questions just no longer make sense today. They would sound very awkward if you ask certain things that you asked in 2011, but we tried to keep kind of a core set of questions stable, just to have this comparison. Now, even if you think about social media or social networking sites, I mean, a major challenge in this kind of survey research is obviously how specific do you want to ask people what they use. You could, of course, ask about using Facebook. We do ask about using Twitter, for instance, and LinkedIn. But anyway, if you asked about using MySpace in 2011 or whatever, it's just not relevant anymore. And in 2011, nobody would have had the idea to ask about Instagram because I guess it didn't even exist yet, right? So then you just can't really compare major trends uh, of social media use defined more in terms of functionality and purpose and maybe even gratification sought by individuals, which is one of the theoretical approaches common in media use research. So um, on the other hand, if you keep it too broad and just ask people kind of researchy terms, kind of academic things, then maybe they won't even recognize that you're actually asking them about, in this example, maybe their Instagram use. So maybe you ask someone, do you use I don't know, image sharing applications. And they say, maybe they'd say no, even though they use Instagram, because that's just a weird way to ask the question. So this is just a challenge of this kind of survey research. But anyway, um, at this level of abstraction that we were able to manage here for social networking sites, we kept it constant throughout the years. And of course, unsurprisingly, we do see an increase. The major jump was between the years of 2015 and 2017, where this also, I mean, it really then surpassed the um, 50% of the population. Now, this is not even for just users of the internet. This is basically for everyone aged 14 years and over. So, including very or young teenagers and very old people, and up to 90, 93, I think it was in the data. Okay, so that's the picture, and you can also compare it in this graph with some of the other major trends. So the most significant one overall during these years is that of using the internet on the go, of mobile use. This has had very large growth. And this is kind of the major trend. Of course, this is closely tied to social media use. Sure, for instance, Facebook started as a web application that you use in your browser, as did other of the other social media. But now it's really optimized for the apps on iOS and Android, and this is really the main interface that people have and experience, and it's the one that where the most is invested by Facebook and others. Um, and this kind of goes hand in hand. Better devices will promote the uptake of specific features and apps, and this is also kind of what we'll be talking about in other sessions. So now, if we look at Figure 5, this just goes to show what I just said. The devices that are being used, the smartphone, is obviously a major driver of this. Starting maybe 10 years ago, it became really mainstream. I mean, comparably, this is a very extreme trend. If you think about generally the diffusion of new technologies and services in society of this kind related to information and communication technologies, the rise of the smartphone is, I mean, it's pretty much unprecedented. And maybe for most of you, it's kind of hard to imagine a world before or without this, but it's really very, very recent in a kind of a larger time frame of reference. So I'd even say it's only been in the last 5 years, maybe, that this is like a societal standard where people expect you to have a smartphone and also a data plan, which is a kind of a separate issue, but of course related. Um, I mean, yeah, maybe you remember traveling to places and having to, even in Switzerland, and not having a Wi-Fi access or whatever. And I mean, this is just a couple of years back, right? So this is a major trend that's entwined with the uptake and rise of social media use. Although, of course, I mean, with the argument of media being social and the web being social. Of course, the overall trend has been going on for about 30 years, but of the more modern applications we're talking about right now. The next graph I want to show you is number 13. Let's have a look there. So here we can see the age variable is the color differentiation on the x-axis. We have time, or the years of the surveys, and on the x-axis, on the y-axis, excuse me, is the percentage again of the Swiss population. And this again goes to show this mobile internet trend that's very closely connected with social media. I mean, if we include applications like WhatsApp in our definition of social media, then obviously this is a big driver, and this possibility of interpersonal kind of asynchronous instant messaging communication with the inclusion of multimedia videos and photos and the option of having groups. I mean, this was a very attractive proposition for many people, and here you can really see the very significant jump of younger individuals. So 14 to 29, basically those two groups, it really takes off. Around 2013, and then I mean it didn't even have much more potential to grow because it was already around 98%. And on the other hand, of older individuals using mobile internet, we see kind of a steady growth, and with really large parts now this year or last year. This is becoming much more of a standard. And then there's a kind of a clear break. I mean, of course, these age categories are somewhat arbitrarily drawn, but there's a really pronounced gap between the older old and the younger old. So 50 to 69, many of these people are, of course, still active in the labor force. Here we have it's an absolute standard. So we have about 80% of individuals who use the internet on the go. Basically, this implies a data plan, right? And the percentage is even higher, of course, if you look at only internet users, or especially if you look at people who are actually employed at the time of the survey. Okay, so let's jump over to the detailed report on applications after this general overview. And here we can see, actually, as a first indication, um, this was something I could have mentioned before. I mentioned we survey about 1,200 people or 1,100 people every year. As you can see right here, this was the total sample last year during the spring or summer. 1,122, 1,035 of those are internet users currently. Works out 91%, I think. And here we see the users of social online networking sites, 737. So this is just the raw numbers of the sample that we're talking about right now. If we look at figure 2 here, this is the context of this whole these whole developments in usage of internet-based applications, of smartphones, of social media. We have the self-reported weekly use duration. So this is a kind of a hard thing to ask in a survey again, because how people add up these minutes and what they actually consider use and what they forget or underestimate or overestimate. Obviously, there's quite a bit of bias in this, but it's been relatively stable, and it matches up very well with other samples that try to ask about total use in terms of time, and corresponding to the jump in mobile internet adoption. We see the jump here after the year 2013, and it tapered off here, leveled off to around 25 hours in an average week, which is double from 8 years back. So that's quite a significant change of the the overall kind of media communication landscape and what people are spending their time on. Now, of course, there's nothing about what they're actually doing here, but we have some more detailed data on that as well. So let's now look at figure 12. This is kind of as a side note. This was a special module last year on sharing economy services. In Switzerland, this the never responses, people who never use these things, is very large. So I mean, about 28% use them at all, meaning ever. And the active, offering your apartment for rent through Airbnb or things like that. Of course, that's an even smaller percentage who engages in that type of use. Again, I mean, you can call these social media, right? This is kind of up for debate. Maybe not the first thing you think about, but obviously, this is things like Airbnb offer a digital platform where people are matched, right, with demand and supply, and the platform affordances kind of determine how this works and how the pricing works and everything else. And again, this is heavily reliant on mobile applications, basically. Now, in Figure 14, we're looking at the use of basically social interaction or communication applications. Now, these numbers are based on only the internet users, and unsurprisingly, using email. I mean, you could call email social media, sure, but nobody really associates it with that. Using email is basically synonymous with using the internet, unsurprisingly. And then instant messaging, things like WhatsApp, or a couple of years ago, chat was more of a common name. This is also very, very prevalent, right? So, and more specifically, if we look at the use of social networking sites, here we differentiated between professional and private. So more the Facebook types, and here more the LinkedIn types. This is also very widespread with more than 60%. But again, like this, I mean, 60% is a large number, but this also implies that it's not everyone. Like it's not fair to assume that everyone uses social media or even cares about it, or has the necessary skills. And then the needs also differ, right? Also for the professional, this really depends on job type. If this makes sense, if you know about this, just your general situation. But this has also been rising, and it's a significant number of people, as I'm sure you know. Um, so in the next figure, we again introduce time on the x-axis. Obviously, just this kind of pops out. Obviously, email has been synonymous with internet use even back in 2011. This is kind of the base. I mean, and then if you look at it from a bit back, obviously what really jumps out is this pink line that jumps up in 2013 to basically 90% today, which is this instant messaging question we had, right? And again, this coincides with the rise of mobile internet use and kind of the popularity of these services. I mean, think about since when you've been using these services. I'm sure that must have been around that time. So this is this is the dominant interaction application based on the internet, basically, aside from email. And as we saw before, the more personal, private online communities or social networking sites are here around 70% or a bit higher. Now, this is because now we're looking at internet users only as opposed to the general population. And the the black line. Ah, okay, not sure what's going on there. Looks like an error in the label. Anyways, now let's look at the next figure. Uh, Now this is a kind of a different perspective on social media. This was kind of, I mean, 10 years ago, or I don't know, 8 years ago, the term user generated content was a big thing. There was obviously this hope, like you just give people the tools and they'll build stuff, right? They'll contribute photos, videos, and obviously some people did, but the vast majority did not. So, and this was heavily dependent on kind of motivations and especially skills. And so, I mean, think about your environment and your use. Maybe it's just a very different thing to kind of lurk and observe and scroll and like than to actually. I mean, like how many of you are kind of active YouTubers or something like that, or really regularly post snaps or videos on Instagram? This is just a different kind of use. Um, if you define it more broadly, though, just any kind of content that you created, I mean, then this, depending on how you think about it, I mean, a comment on a social media platform like Facebook or Instagram is contributing your content, right? I mean, it would be different if you didn't do that. So that's something that you I mean, upload is kind of an antiquated term in this regard, but anyway, it's basically that's what it is, right? And just the sharing of things, kind of forwarding or retweeting or sharing something in WhatsApp groups, a link to a video, things like that. Obviously, that's very popular. And if you look at very specific uses, something like actually contributing to Wikipedia, actually writing articles, researching stuff, more long form stuff. Obviously, that's a very kind of niche activity within social media, and this tends to be a very closed system. With its, although it's like technologically obviously open source, anyone can do it. Is what you hear. That's not the practice of it. So I mean, essentially, it's a small group of I don't know 35-year-old men who write Wikipedia, right? That's been one of the things that's been criticized and researched, heavily dependent on skills and kind of the implicit social norms in these kinds of online environments. Um, okay, so let's have a quick glance at the next figure. Um, this is about the usage intensity of these things. So the figures we saw so far are just everybody who does it more than never, basically. So the response options were something like multiple times a day, daily, once a month, and so on, and then never. And everybody who doesn't never do it, so whoever does it, was counted as a user of that specific application or use or service or whatever it was. Um, and the thing with social media is those who do use it, which, depending on what you look at, could be 70%, they tend to use it very frequently. This is kind of in the nature of the application. Other things, like looking for a job online as a use, you wouldn't do that multiple times a day. Maybe you would, but then you're kind of looking for a job. So it depends a bit on what you're actually doing and what the context is. But these social media applications have a very high proportion of daily users. I mean, I'm sure this makes sense in just think about your everyday online life. Basically, it's not like you're gonna do all your conversations on 2 days a month in WhatsApp, whatever. So this is kind of a specificity of this kind of internet use here, social media use. Um, in the next figure right here, we can see on the x-axis the age groups. This is probably not very shocking, but still, it's interesting to empirically show that the use of private or professional social online networking sites is is essentially non-optional for teenagers. I mean, I don't think we had in our sample of couple hundred. I don't think we had a single person who did not use these things. And then there's a severe drop off again, kind of with another break at 69-year-olds, because here often, or 65 or a bit later, so often this obviously people go out of the workforce. But I mean, there are many uses, right, that are not professional. Obviously, these are mostly social and private, but still, then you kind of lose access to some of these things. Maybe lose or don't have opportunities to learn new skills, and just general interest. I mean, this is a trend that you can observe lots of times. Um, but anyway, so these are really severe differences from like 40% to 100% between age groups. So this overall figure of 60 or 70%, I mean, this really diverges depending on which subgroups of the population you then care about. So this is something to keep in mind, right? If you, I don't know, if you were a company, some startup promoting like healthy activities for older adults, and basically you think you're going to program an app, I'm sure that's fine, and you'd find thousands of users in Switzerland, but you have to know that from the beginning you're only addressing 40% of those, and maybe not those who would need it most. On the other hand, for young people, this is basically a given. For Twitter, I mean, this is one of the services that we ask specifically about. Um, this kind of hump around 30 to 49. This indicates that it's like a tool that's used very much in a more professional context. These are like heavy news readers, just overall heavy users, and for younger people, there are often alternatives that are more attractive, and older people often really don't see any value in something like Twitter. Always with, of course, many exceptions. So I mean, these are aggregate numbers, and we're never talking about like an individual. And you'll always find people that go against these general trends. Just to make that clear as well. Now, if we look specifically at the diffusion of social networking sites over time, again, the lines and colors differentiate by age groups. I mean, this is just kind of a steady rise from 2011 to today, with this jump for 14 to 19-year-olds. Like, but you know, if we saw before that older adults were very low on these averages, yeah, sure, but that it used to be much lower. So, and there, you know, they even have the potential for the growth. Obviously, you know, this can only go down, right? Looking further. No, I mean, no reason to believe it will. But anyways, again, this goes to the kind of the everyday use, kind of the those people who use these things then tend to use them daily. If we differentiate uses here by kind of general, um, kind of general goal or function, more so kind of informational uses of the internet, entertainment uses, transactional or commerce uses, and interaction uses, you can see right away that like the bars down here in purple are much bigger. So these interaction services tend to be those that are used daily if they're used, with of course the exception of actually contributing your own content. So I mean, if you are someone that maybe uses the internet for watching TV, sure, this number is quite high, but that those who would do that daily is comparably low. And here, of course, instant messaging and even social networking site use. If you do that, you're probably doing it daily, which makes sense. Um, okay, let's jump to the next figure. Um, this is a very similar picture. Now we're not talking about daily use, but mobile use. So again, if you are a user of social media like instant messaging and social networking sites, the likelihood that you do this on a mobile device is very high. Other things, as you can imagine, for example, banking online, so paying your bills or just managing your money. This tends to be still tied to desktop and laptop computers a lot, although this is changing very, very quickly, but it hasn't really reflected in the numbers yet. On the other hand, some of these services were from the beginning designed with mobile use first in mind, or even exclusively. I mean, you need like workarounds and special, I don't know, special skills if you want to use Instagram on your desktop computer. Maybe if you do it for work, that would be more comfortable. But that's really not what the developers have in mind, right? So these interaction-based online uses, including social media, are heavily reliant on kind of anytime, everywhere, anywhere use, mobile use, and kind of this always on idea in your pocket. Um, okay, let's jump a bit to this next figure. Right here, just because I thought it was interesting. We introduce here educational level on the x-axis with low, medium, high differentiations. In the survey, this was more detailed, but if you aggregate it like this, you don't see huge trends, but there are differences. So this is a bivariate analysis. So I mean, we're leaving everything else out. It's just analyzing the groups with lower education, with medium education, with higher education, and their means in the percentage of those who do this more than never. And interestingly, this is kind of the opposite of what we see in many other online applications. If you think about, I don't know, contributing to Wikipedia, researching information, this tends to correlate positively with education, and for social media, that's really not necessarily the case. So for social networking sites, and even for uploading content, we do see actually higher levels for lower educated individuals, and this does hold up somewhat if you introduce covariates, if in multivariate analyses. But this is just a very kind of the broad picture. As one last figure in this report, let's look at number 35. Here we introduce on the x-axis internet skills. These are self-assessed skills. So how you perceive, like how good you are at using various internet applications and kind of overall. And here we can see this correlation that this a lot of these services, kind of these uses and the skills are closely connected. So the skills enable you to even use something and do it in the way you want it, so that it's kind of in line with what you're trying to achieve. And on the other hand, by using them, you learn these new skills and how to adapt and use similar applications, and how to use the settings and so on, the specific features, as you increase your usage. So we do often see this connection between skills and more advanced uses. The very established uses that are basically synonymous, or just technically very not very demanding, they would correlate less. So, for example, emails. I mean, you just have kind of a ceiling effect because everybody uses it, and if you start using the internet with bad skills, I mean, you're still going to manage to send an email. That's kind of reflected in this data here. Now we have in one of the reports a focus on trust and concerns when using the internet in different devices, and some of this is particularly relevant for social media use, I'd say. Um, so let's look at one of the figures here. I mean, often these are not specifically about social media, but the way they're framed and what the dominant uses are, they they very much are about social media. Um, this is kind of an interesting observation here that we've made, and this very general question, like how much of the information online do you think is trustworthy? Obviously, again, this is a very difficult question to answer in these categories, but still overall it does give us a sense of trust in content, and we do then differentiate by source of the content. But anyway, so these overall trends, like, I mean, a few people would say, like, nothing or everything online is trustworthy. So if we look at the line, um, here, this darker color, most, people who say most or all, but I mean those who say all is a very small percentage. But if we focus on this most, like, this was not very critical. I mean, this was 30, more than 35% of the Swiss population said, most things online are trustworthy. Sure, like, this is not a majority, but still, this is a very significant proportion of the population. And then after the 2013 survey, we saw a very steep decline, and it stayed low now. I mean, we have no way of really kind of proving this empirically or supporting this claim empirically, but as you may know, and then after a survey in 2013, actually in the summer, then I think, or fall, there was this whole Edward Snowden revelation of the NSA surveillance program and everything that was connected to that. Um, and of course, the situation was the same before 2013, but it really entered consciousness after that, and people started stating that much more of these things are untrustworthy, with with effects that are not very desirable, where people are questioning actually sources that are trustworthy. But that's kind of a different debate that could be had. Let's have a quick look at the next figure. This is what I mentioned. If you differentiate by services currently, in Switzerland, this was a different scale. We have means here. Uh, in Switzerland, the government and the public broadcaster still have very high trust, overall, as do kind of newspapers, the more broadsheet style newspapers. Um, and just as a general category, social online networking sites are much lower. Again, I mean, if this was something you were to research, you would have to differentiate more, like, what exactly it is, because obviously you can have, professional news articles embedded within online social networking sites, or, like, what are people thinking about? Are they thinking about comments or claims by just people they know, by celebrities, by professional sources? But overall, it's just an indication that here people are much more skeptical, and probably rightly so. Yeah, this was a time trend. Not too much there. Slow declines. And let's have a quick look at figures 14 and 15. These are some of the general concerns about privacy violations when using the internet. Here, differentiated by concerns about companies violating your privacy, other people, so more in the immediate social context, and the government violating your privacy. This is generally lowest here in Switzerland in this survey. Um, and interestingly, if we look at the x-axis, we have the age groups again. These concerns are actually very high for regarding corporations for 20 to 49-year-olds, so kind of the professionals. Um, and we have some indication, of this idea that young people don't care, they're not very concerned, they're very naive when they use social media. But on the other hand, it depends a bit where you mark the categories. Then, like, these people, 20 to 29-year-olds, are among the most concerned, and this is then reflected in some of the countermeasures they may take. Um, obviously, generally, people are going to say, yes, I'm very cautious. I protect my privacy. How they do this, that's kind of a different question. A very strange question here. I have nothing to hide. Where, I mean, this suffers a bit from the survey situation, I'd say. But stating that you have nothing to hide, for 70% of the population or internet using population. Um, that's kind of a weird result that we could discuss if you'd like. There's the feeling that you're able to kind of have your privacy under control online. I mean, this is kind of even between yes and no. This really depends a lot on your skills and also on just your knowledge of how these things work and what's going on, and what you're kind of thinking about. Let's have a very quick last jump back to this report on general internet diffusion. Here in some of the last figures, we had a focus on digital well-being, which is something we're going to be talking about a lot in this course. This kind of relates uh, to to the expectations around social media use. A lot of people use these things, but a lot of people also don't. And some of these experience this as kind of a social pressure. So, for example, my professional environment expects that I'm very able to deal with and use different internet applications. This is a very sizable proportion. Um, and you can also look at this uh, down here. 1 second. By age. Yeah. So, maybe some of these concerns are low for young individuals, but they also feel they're very much like under pressure to be able to use these things. But at the same time, these people are also those um, who say they have the most skills to kind of counteract this. Um, and as one last figure, the younger people are like they're also those that employ some of the strategies against privacy violations about being overly stressed. Um, so just simple things like turning off notifications, and this again pertains mostly to social media, like new likes or whatever. People have in the last couple of years really started to experience kind of an overabundance here and have developed strategies for their basically for their own mental health. So it's not like uh, young users are just naive users, right? They're also often most skilled um, and most able to kind of deal with this with countermeasures like just turning off notifications for certain applications. Okay, so that's it for an overview of internet use in Switzerland with a focus on social media use and kind of the related practices and concerns and privacy attitudes that will kind of serve us as a frame of reference when we talk about various aspects of social media use.